My name is Maya Kessler. I'm 44 years old. I'm a senior fraud investigator for one of the largest property insurance carriers in the Southeast. And on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, my own father stood in the kitchen of our family's beach cottage on Folly Beach and told me I wasn't welcome at the closing table because, in his exact words, "You work for them, not us." He said it holding a stack of papers he thought I'd never see. Papers that would have gone through without a hitch if he'd been dealing with anyone else's daughter. My mother nodded along the way she always does when my father makes a decision she's already made for him. My brother Sean stood by the sliding door with his arms crossed, sunburned and smug, already spending money that wasn't his yet. And behind all three of them, taped to the refrigerator with a banana magnet, was a contractor's estimate for storm damage that I had seen once before, 3 years earlier, in a very different form. I didn't argue that night. I didn't raise my voice. I picked up my coffee cup, rinsed it in the sink the way my mother taught me, and I said, "Okay." Then I drove back to Charleston in the dark, and I pulled a folder out of my home office that I had promised myself I would never have to open. What none of them understood, standing in that kitchen feeling so sure of themselves, was two things. First, that cottage had not belonged only to my father in over a decade, and second, the papers on that counter were not going to survive contact with an actual audit because I had already seen the invoices before someone altered them. If you're enjoying stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. To understand how I ended up standing in my parents' kitchen being told I wasn't real family enough to sit at a closing table, you have to go back almost 40 years, to a narrow lot on the marsh side of Folly Beach, South Carolina, where my father, Walter Kessler, worked the docks at the municipal marina for 34 years and raised 2 children in a house that flooded a little more every hurricane season. My father wasn't a wealthy man, but he was a proud one, and pride in my family has always done the job that money couldn't. He kept boats running for other people his entire working life, and he came home every evening smelling like diesel and salt, and he loved my brother Sean with an uncomplicated, easy love that I watched from the doorway for most of my childhood. My mother, Renata, ran the house the way some women run a small country, quietly, completely, with a firm hand on who got what. She wasn't cruel. I want to say that clearly before I say anything else, because this isn't a story about a monster. It's a story about a family that built its whole shape around one child without ever noticing what that shape did to the other one. Sean is 2 years younger than me, and when he was 4 months old, he stopped breathing for almost 90 seconds during a bout of RSV that put him in the pediatric ICU at MUSC for 11 days. My mother has told that story so many times over the decades that I could recite it in my sleep, and it always ends the same way. I promised God right there in that hallway that if he lived, I would never let anything happen to that boy again. I don't think she ever noticed that the promise outlasted its purpose, or that somewhere along the way it stopped being about keeping Sean alive and started being about keeping Sean comfortable, no matter what it costs the rest of us. I was 6 when that happened, old enough to remember being dropped at my grandmother's for 11 days while the whole world orbited around a hospital room I wasn't allowed into. What I struggled with, for most of my life, was what came after. The years where we almost lost him became the reason Sean got the new bike and I got the hand-me-down. The reason his mediocre report cards were treated as heroic effort and my good ones were simply expected. The reason my extracurriculars got cut first whenever money got tight. Never his. I got through high school working the register at a surf shop, saving quietly, and got a partial scholarship to the College of Charleston, where I studied risk management almost by accident. I graduated, took an entry-level claims adjuster job at $19 an hour, and worked my way up over 2 decades into the Special Investigations Unit, the part of an insurance company that exists to find the claims that don't add up. I got good at reading a stack of paper and finding the one line that doesn't belong. I got good at it because, in a way I didn't recognize for a long time, I had been training for it my whole childhood, watching a family construct a story about itself and quietly noting every place the story didn't match the facts. I never resented Sean for the attention he got, not for a long time. He didn't ask to almost die as a baby, and he didn't ask to be loved the way he was loved. He grew up easy and warm and likable in a way I never quite managed. He went into charter fishing after high school, worked other captains' boats for a decade, and about 6 years ago, with some help from our parents, saved enough to buy his own boat and start Kessler charters out of the Folly Beach Marina, where our father had spent his whole career. I want to be fair to Sean here, because the story that follows isn't really about him being a villain. It's about what happens when a family spends 40 years building a structure that only holds weight in one direction, and then asks the person who was never allowed to lean on it to hold it up anyway. The cottage sits 3 blocks off the water on a lot my grandparents bought in 1961 for a price that sounds like a typo now. My grandfather built the original 2-bedroom structure himself, board by board, over about 4 years, and when he passed, it went to my father, who added a second story in the 90s, mostly with his own hands and a lot of borrowed help from other marina guys on their days off. That cottage is the only thing my family has ever owned outright that felt like it mattered, and every single one of us grew up understanding, without ever being told directly, that it was the closest thing we had to an inheritance. About 12 years ago, my father made a decision that nearly cost him that cottage, and it's the reason everything that happened later was even possible. He'd co-signed a loan for a friend's fishing supply business that went under fast and ugly, and the debt suddenly, legally, belonged to my father. He'd taken out a second mortgage against the cottage years earlier to cover a lean stretch, and between that balance and the co-signed debt coming due, he was looking at losing the house within about 18 months. He didn't tell Sean, who was 26 at the time and deep into his own struggling boat career. He told me, late one night on the phone, his voice doing a thing I'd never heard it do before, something close to fear. I had just made senior investigator that year, and I had savings I'd been quietly building since my first paycheck at the surf shop, the kind of savings that come from a person who never really believed anyone else was going to catch her if she fell. I paid off the second mortgage. All of it in a single transfer, no fanfare, because I didn't want it to be a thing. My father cried on the phone and said he didn't know how he'd ever pay me back. I told him he didn't have to pay me back in money. I asked for one thing instead. I asked to be added to the deed as a co-owner, quietly, formally, through an actual attorney, not a handshake. I didn't ask because I distrusted my father. I asked because some part of me, even then, understood that in my family, verbal promises had a way of evaporating the moment they became inconvenient, and I wanted something that couldn't evaporate. My father agreed without hesitation. We used a real estate attorney in Charleston, Priscilla Odom, who drew up the deed transfer properly, filed it with the Charleston County Register of Deeds, and had it notarized by my Aunt Vivian, my mother's older sister, who happened to be a licensed notary at the bank where she worked at the time. I never told Sean. I never told my mother. Not directly, though I always assumed my father would mention it eventually. What I didn't know for the next 12 years was that my father had quietly let the whole thing blur in everyone's memory, including possibly his own, back into a story about a loan I'd generously paid off and nothing more. The deed sat in the public record the entire time, available to anyone who bothered to look. Nobody ever bothered to look. 3 years ago, Hurricane Persephone came up the coast and did what hurricanes on Folly Beach have always done, tearing shingles off the roof, cracking 2 support posts under the back porch, and pushing enough water under the foundation to warp part of the subfloor in the downstairs bathroom. My father filed a claim through his own homeowner's policy, a regional carrier, not the company I work for, which matters for reasons that will become clear. He asked me, purely as a daughter who understood insurance, to look over the contractor's estimate before he submitted it. I did. Most of it looked reasonable. Roof replacement, porch post repair, subfloor remediation, all priced roughly in line with what I'd expect for storm damage of that scope. I told him it looked fine, and I told him to submit it, and I didn't think about it again for almost 3 years. What I didn't know then was that the version he actually submitted wasn't quite the version he'd shown me. Here's what I want you to understand about the next 3 years, because nothing that happened in that kitchen came out of nowhere. Sean's charter business had been struggling since the pandemic disrupted his first 2 seasons, and by last year, he was quietly behind on the loan for his boat, a 42-foot sport fisher he'd financed at a rate that had crept upward twice. He never told me this directly. I found pieces of it the way I find pieces of most things, by paying attention when nobody expected me to be paying attention, during a Sunday dinner where he mentioned, a little too casually, that he might need to restructure some things before the spring season. My mother, meanwhile, had started talking about the cottage differently, not as the family home anymore, but as an asset, a word she'd clearly picked up somewhere and liked the shape of in her mouth. That property is worth over $600,000 now, she said one Thanksgiving, apropos of nothing, looking out at the marsh grass like she was already spending the number. I should have paid closer attention to that sentence. I didn't, not fully, not until it was almost too late. The betrayal, when it finally arrived, came exactly 1 week before this past Thanksgiving, on a Wednesday evening when I drove down from Charleston after work the way I did most weeks, carrying a bag of oysters I'd picked up on the way, because that had become, without either of us ever discussing it, a small ritual between my father and me. I let myself in through the side door the way I always did, and I heard voices in the kitchen before I saw them. My mother's and my father's and Sean's, low and urgent in the particular register of a conversation that stops the second someone new walks in. It stopped. My father was standing at the counter with a manila folder open in front of him, and my mother was beside him with her reading glasses pushed up into her hair, and Sean was leaning against the sliding door to the back porch with his arms crossed, and an expression I hadn't seen on him since we were teenagers, and he'd been caught doing something he already knew he'd get away with. "What's going on?" I asked, setting the oysters on the counter. My father closed the folder, not quite fast enough. "We were just going over some paperwork," he said. "What kind of paperwork?" my mother answered. "We've decided to sell the cottage, Maya. Sean needs the capital for the business, and honestly, with your father's knees the way they are, we're thinking a condo closer to town makes more sense anyway." "You're selling the house Dad and Grandpa built." "It's just a house," my mother said, which was the single most dishonest sentence I had ever heard come out of her mouth, and I'd heard a lot of them. "When were you going to tell me?" "We're closing next month," my father said. "There's a buyer already, a couple from Greenville. It's a clean, fast sale." I asked to see the folder, and my father hesitated in a way that told me everything before he even answered. "There's nothing for you to look at here, Maya. This is between me, your mother, and the title company." Sean finally spoke up from the doorway, an edge in his voice I wasn't used to hearing directed at me. "Maya, come on. You work for an insurance company. Every time there's paperwork in this family, you turn it into an investigation. Just let this one go." "I'm not investigating anything. I'm asking to see a document about a house I grew up in." My father closed the folder fully now, tucked it under his arm like a man protecting something. And then he said the sentence I will hear for the rest of my life, delivered flat and certain, like he'd rehearsed it in his head more than once before I ever walked through that door. "You work for them, not us, Maya. This is a family decision, and I think it's better if you sit this one out." I want you to understand what that sentence actually did, standing in that kitchen. It took every year I had spent being useful to that family. The second mortgage, the deed, the quiet drives down from Charleston, the decades of being told I was the responsible one, and it turned all of it into evidence against me. Being competent, being careful, had somehow become a reason to be excluded from a decision about a house I legally half-owned. I didn't say any of that out loud that night. I looked at the three of them, and I felt something very old and very familiar settle into place. The particular cold clarity that had gotten me through the hardest audits of my career. I said, "Okay," rinsed my coffee cup in the sink, and left. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. If you found out the family you'd spent your whole life quietly propping up had already decided to erase you from the paperwork, would you have argued in that kitchen? Or would you have walked out the way I did? Drop your answer in the comments, because it matters for what comes next. The drive back to Charleston took 40 minutes, and I didn't cry, and I didn't call anyone. I went home, made a cup of tea I didn't drink, and I opened the file cabinet in my home office where I keep exactly one folder that has nothing to do with my job. Inside was a copy of the deed transfer from 12 years ago, with my name on it as a co-owner of the Folly Beach property, filed and recorded with Charleston County. I hadn't looked at it in years. I'd almost forgotten the specific language in it, the part where the attorney had structured it as a joint tenancy with right of survivorship, which meant, in plain terms, that my father could not legally sell that property without my signature. They didn't know I was on the deed. I understood that now, sitting in my kitchen at 11 at night with a cold cup of tea. 12 years of family conversations had quietly rewritten what happened, turning a legal co-ownership into a vague memory of Maya helped out with a loan once, and nobody had bothered to actually pull the deed and check. That wasn't the only thing in the folder, though. Underneath the deed copy was a second folder I'd printed out the week after Hurricane Persephone. I'd kept a copy for myself at the time, out of professional habit more than suspicion. I pulled it out now and set it next to the folder my father had been guarding in the kitchen earlier that evening. The estimate I'd reviewed 3 years ago listed roof replacement, porch post repair, and subfloor remediation, priced at just under $22,000 total, which the carrier had paid out in full within about 6 weeks. Reasonable, documented, exactly what storm damage of that scope should cost. I didn't have proof of anything else yet. I just had a bad feeling and 12 years of professional instinct telling me that a family suddenly needing a clean, fast sale and a father who'd just gotten cagey about a folder were not unrelated facts. So I did the only thing that has ever made sense to me when the ground feels unstable under my feet. I started building a record. I want to be honest about why I didn't just call my father the next morning and confront him. Part of it was that I genuinely didn't know yet what I was looking at. But if I'm being fully truthful, part of it was fear. The old, familiar fear of being the one who disrupts the peace. The fear that had kept me quiet through decades of unequal treatment. So instead, over the following 10 days, I did what I do for a living. I pulled the public deed record from the Charleston County Register of Deeds website and printed it, date-stamped and certified. I called Priscilla Odom, the attorney who'd handled the original transfer, and confirmed she still had the file, and asked her to send a certified copy of everything, which she did within 2 days. I reached out carefully to my Aunt Vivian, who had notarized the original transfer, and I asked her, gently, whether she remembered it. She remembered it perfectly, better than I did. She told me she'd always found it strange that nobody in the family ever mentioned it again after that day, and she admitted she'd wondered whether my parents had simply chosen to forget it because remembering it complicated the story they preferred to tell about themselves. Talking to her felt like putting my hand on something solid for the first time in 10 days. Then I did the harder thing. I called a former colleague, a claims examiner named Dara Whitfield, who still worked at the regional carrier that had handled my father's storm claim, someone I'd known since our adjuster days and trusted completely. I asked her, as one professional to another, whether it was possible to request a copy of a closed claim file as the policyholder's family member with a documented ownership interest in the property, which, as a deed holder, I legally was. She said it was possible, and that it would take a couple of weeks to process. I submitted it that same night. I told myself I was doing this to protect myself, to understand my legal position before I ever sat down with my family again. That was true. But underneath that reasonable explanation was something else I wasn't ready to admit yet. Some part of me needed to know whether the family that had just erased me from a decision about my own house had also been dishonest about something much larger. The claim file came back 11 days later, right around the same time my mother started calling to smooth things over, the way she always did after my father said something too honest to take back. "Don't be dramatic about the sale, Maya," she said on the phone one evening. "Your father didn't mean it the way it sounded. We just don't want this to turn into one of your work things." One of your work things. As though thoroughness were a personality flaw I needed to be managed around. I read the claim file the same night I got it, sitting at my kitchen table with a legal pad, the way I read every file, methodically, top to bottom, twice. And there, on the third page, was the original contractor's estimate, submitted by a company called Coastal Restoration Partners, dated the same week my father had shown me his version. It was not the same document. The version my father had shown me listed roof replacement, porch post repair, and subfloor remediation, $22,000, straightforward storm damage. The version actually submitted to the insurance carrier, the one that had been paid out, included 2 additional line items that hadn't been in the estimate I reviewed. A full kitchen renovation, cabinets, countertops, and appliances, listed as storm-related interior damage remediation, and a new HVAC system, listed as storm-related mechanical system failure. Combined, those 2 additional items came to just under $31,000, more than the entire rest of the claim put together. I sat with that for a long time. I want to be honest about what I felt, because it wasn't triumph, and it wasn't even really anger, not yet. It was a kind of grief, the specific grief of watching a suspicion you'd hoped was wrong turn out to be right. My father had, at some point after showing me the honest version of that estimate, either commissioned or allowed a second, inflated version to be submitted in its place, one that used real storm damage as cover to get his insurance company to pay for a kitchen and HVAC system that had nothing to do with Hurricane Persephone at all. Insurance fraud is not a small thing. It's not a gray area, whatever people tell themselves when they're doing it. It carries real legal exposure, both for the policyholder and, depending on how involved they were, for the contractor who submitted the falsified estimate. And now I understood, with a clarity that made my stomach turn, exactly why my father might want a fast, clean sale of that property, and exactly why he might not want his daughter, an insurance fraud investigator by profession, anywhere near the paperwork. I didn't confront him yet. I want to explain why, because it matters. If I went to him with this immediately, in anger, over the phone, he would have every opportunity to get his story straight, to coordinate with my mother and Sean, to bury or explain away whatever I'd found before I ever had it fully documented. So I did the thing I've always done when the ground felt unstable. I kept building the record, quietly, completely, the way you build a case you only intend to use once. Thanksgiving was 5 days away. My mother had already sent the group text about what everyone should bring. And underneath the ordinary, cheerful logistics of a holiday dinner, My family was still planning to close on the sale of a house that legally could not be sold without me, funded in part by a fraudulent insurance claim they had no idea I could prove. Sean called me 2 days before Thanksgiving, the first time he'd reached out directly since the kitchen. His voice had the practiced warmth of someone who'd been coached. I found out later from Vivian that my mother had told him to smooth things over with your sister before the holiday. "Hey, Maya," he said. "I know things got weird last week. I'm sorry if I came off harsh. It's just, this deal really matters. I've got payments piling up on the boat, and if this sale doesn't go through by January, I might lose it." I asked him gently whether he knew exactly where the sale money was going. He said the plan was to split it, most of it to him for the boat loan, some to our parents for the condo, a token amount held for me that Mom had described as your share once things settle. "Your share," I repeated. "Sean, do you know I'm actually on the deed? Not as a manner of speaking. Legally, on paper, since the second mortgage got paid off." There was a long pause. "Wait, what? Dad said you just helped out with a loan." "I did. I also asked to be added as a legal co-owner, and Dad agreed, and we had an attorney do it properly 12 years ago." Another pause, longer this time. "Mom never said anything about that." "I don't think Mom ever really understood it," I said, which I believed then and still believe now. "I think everyone just found it easier to remember it as a favor instead of an ownership stake, because a favor doesn't require asking permission." Sean didn't say anything for a while, and when he finally spoke again, his voice had lost some of its rehearsed warmth. "So the sale can't actually happen without you signing off?" "No," I said. "It can't." That was the moment, I think, the whole plan my parents had built started to wobble, 3 days before it was supposed to close, and Sean hadn't even known the foundation was cracked until I told him myself. Thanksgiving morning, I drove down to Folly Beach the way I always did, except this time I brought 2 folders instead of a bag of oysters. My Aunt Vivian offered to come with me, and I said yes, because some truths only land properly when there's a witness in the room who has nothing to gain from either side. The cottage smelled like it always did on Thanksgiving, turkey and salt air, and the particular mustiness of a house that had survived 60 years of coastal weather. My mother had the table set with the good china, the same china she'd used every Thanksgiving of my entire life, and for one strange moment, walking through that door, I almost let myself believe the day could just be a normal day. It didn't stay that way for long. My father was in an unusually good mood, talking to Sean about the closing date, and I understood, watching them, that he still had no idea what Sean now knew. My mother greeted me warmly, the specific warmth she reserved for days when she needed everyone in the family performing well for each other, and I let her hug me, and I set my folders down on the side table by the door where nobody would notice them yet. We ate. I want you to understand that I sat through an entire Thanksgiving dinner, passing the cranberry sauce, answering questions about my job, watching my father tell the same fishing story he tells every year, all while carrying 2 folders that were about to change the shape of that family permanently. It wasn't performance on my part. It was patience. I had learned, over 20 years of investigating fraud, that the worst thing you can do with solid evidence is present it too early, in anger, before the room is ready to actually hear it. After the pie, when my mother started clearing plates and my father leaned back in his chair, satisfied and a little sleepy, I finally spoke. "Dad, before everyone scatters, I need to talk about the cottage." My mother's hands paused over a stack of dessert plates. My father's eyes opened a little wider. Sean, across the table, went very still in a way that told me he'd been waiting for this all day. "Maya, we already discussed this," my mother said, her voice edging toward the warning tone she used when she wanted a conversation to end before it started. "I know we did," I said, But there are two things nobody in this room has the full picture on, and I think you deserve to have it before Monday, not after. I opened the first folder and set the certified deed copy on the table, between the gravy boat and the half-eaten pie. This is the deed to this house, I said, filed with Charleston County 12 years ago, the year I paid off the second mortgage. It lists Dad and me as joint tenants with right of survivorship. I let that sit for a second. This house cannot be sold without my signature, not to the couple from Greenville, not to anyone. My father stared at the paper like it was written in a language he didn't recognize. My mother's face went through several expressions in quick succession and finally landed on something like panic. That's not... Walter, is that real? My father didn't answer her. I watched him actually remember it, the memory surfacing behind his eyes the way a name comes back to you mid-sentence. I forgot, he said quietly. I completely forgot we did that. I didn't, I said. I've had it in a folder for 12 years, because in this family, things have a way of getting rewritten if nobody keeps a record. My mother's voice sharpened, reaching for the only tool she had left. So what? You're going to block your own brother from saving his business? Over paperwork? This is exactly what your father meant, Maya. You always turn family into a case file. I want you to notice something here, because it's the whole hinge of what happened next. My mother wasn't defending honesty. She was defending the plan. She genuinely believed the only problem in the room was my paperwork. Not the fact that nobody had asked me, not the fact that I'd been told outright that I wasn't real family enough to sit at the closing table. I'm not blocking anything yet, I said. I actually want to help Sean, but before we talk about the deed, there's something else, and I need everyone to sit back down. They sat. I opened the second folder. 3 years ago, after Hurricane Persephone, Dad asked me to look over the contractor's estimate before he filed the storm damage claim. The estimate I saw was $22,000, roof, porch posts, subfloor. Reasonable, clean, exactly what storm damage should look like. I slid the copy of that original estimate across the table. This is what was actually submitted to the insurance company. I set the second document beside it. Same date, same contractor, but with 2 additional line items that weren't in the version I reviewed. A full kitchen renovation and a new HVAC system, both listed as storm-related, totaling almost $31,000, more than the rest of the claim combined. The room went completely silent. My mother's hand had gone still on the tablecloth. I pulled this from the carrier's closed claim file 2 weeks ago as a deed holder with a documented ownership interest in the property, I said. I want to be very clear about something. I'm not calling the carrier's SIU department, and I'm not going to. I'm someone's daughter first, before I'm anything the industry pays me to be. My father's face had gone gray. Maya, that renovation, we needed it. The kitchen was falling apart. The HVAC was 15 years old. I believe you, I said, and I meant it. None of that is storm damage, though. And you know that as well as I do, because you showed me the honest version first, before someone talked you into the other one. It was the contractor's idea, my father said quietly, and I believe that too. He said everybody does it, said it wouldn't hurt anybody. It hurts everybody who pays premiums into that pool, I said, not unkindly, just factually. But that's not why I'm bringing this up today. If this house sells to an outside buyer, the new owners will likely have their own inspection done, and inspectors notice when a kitchen renovation and an HVAC replacement 3 years old don't match anything in the permit history, especially on a coastal property where permits get checked carefully. If that mismatch gets flagged during the sale, it could trigger exactly the kind of audit that turns an old, quiet mistake into a legal problem. I watched my father understand in real time that the sale he'd been counting on was actually the most dangerous way possible to handle what he'd done 3 years earlier. A quiet, unexamined claim sitting in a closed file is one thing. A claim getting cross-checked by a title company during an active sale is something else entirely. "So what do we do?" my mother said, her voice thin and scared in a way I had genuinely never heard from her before. "You don't sell it," I said. "Not to an outside buyer, not right now. And Sean," I turned to my brother, "we figure out a different way to help you with the boat. Not by putting this house or Dad at legal risk." Sean's eyes were wet. "I didn't know any of this, Maya. I swear I didn't know about the claim." "I believe you," I said, and I did. My father sat with his hands flat on the table, staring at the two mismatched estimates. And when he finally spoke, his voice had none of the certainty it had carried in the kitchen the week before. "You work for them, not us," he said quietly, repeating his own sentence back like he was hearing it for the first time from the outside. "That's what I said to you." "You did." "I was wrong," he said. "Some part of me knew you'd figure out the claim eventually, if you ever really looked at it, and I think that's actually why I said it. I didn't want you at that table because I didn't want you looking too closely at the paperwork." Aunt Vivian, who had been quiet through the entire exchange, finally spoke. "I notarized that deed transfer myself, Renata," she said to my mother. "I remember it clearly. I always wondered why nobody in this family ever mentioned it again." She looked around the table. "Maybe it's worth asking why this family has a habit of forgetting the things Maya does for it, right up until the day it's inconvenient to remember." Nobody had an answer for that. Here is what happened over the following weeks, because I know you want the real ending, not just the moment in the kitchen. The sale to the couple from Greenville fell through, not dramatically, just quietly. My father telling the real estate agent that the family had decided to hold on to the property for now. My father contacted the contractor who'd handled the original storm claim, and with my guidance, filed an amended disclosure with the carrier acknowledging the discrepancy in the original estimate, offering to repay the portion attributable to the kitchen and HVAC work. It wasn't required by law for him to do that. Nobody was investigating him, but I told him, honestly, that living the rest of his life with an unresolved fraud sitting quietly in his past was its own kind of sentence, and he agreed. And we worked out a repayment plan with the carrier over 18 months that kept the whole thing a civil matter rather than a criminal one. Sean and I sat down together, just the two of us, at a coffee shop in downtown Charleston about a week after Thanksgiving, and we talked honestly for the first time in years. Not about the house, but about the fact that he'd spent his whole life being loved easily while I'd spent mine being loved conditionally, and that neither of those things had ever really been his fault, but both of them had shaped who we became. I ended up helping him restructure his boat loan through a credit union I knew handled small marine business financing fairly, at a better rate than what he had. And it wasn't a fix for everything, but it kept his business alive without putting our father's freedom on the line to do it. My mother and I have had a harder time of it, if I'm honest. She apologized eventually, in the stilted, uncomfortable way she apologizes for anything, which is to say, she never used the word sorry directly. But she started calling more and started asking questions about my actual job instead of treating it like a personality flaw. And I've decided that's enough of a start for now. The deed stayed exactly as it was. I never asked for the house. I wanted, more than anything, to no longer be the daughter whose competence made her disposable, the one who was useful right up until she was inconvenient. I think about that sentence sometimes, standing on the back porch of that cottage, looking out at the marsh grass my grandfather planted decades ago. You work for them, not us. My father meant it, in that kitchen, as a way of putting me in my place. What he didn't understand was that the very thing that made me useful to strangers for a living, the patience, the thoroughness, the refusal to look away from an uncomfortable set of numbers, was the exact same thing that had kept his own family standing more than once, quietly, without credit, for over a decade. I didn't need an apology to feel like the account was finally settled. I needed the truth on the table, in plain language, in front of the people who'd spent so long deciding what version of me was convenient to remember. And once it was there, once the paperwork finally matched the reality, something in me that had been braced for 20 years simply relaxed. If there's a lesson in what happened at that Thanksgiving table, I think it's this. The people who quietly hold a family together financially, legally, and emotionally are so often the easiest ones to write out of the room because their steadiness looks like something that doesn't need protecting. It does. Every quiet, reliable person deserves a seat at the table they've been holding up. And if your family only remembers what you've done for them the moment they need something from you again, that's not gratitude. That's a transaction dressed up as love. I make sure, now, that my name is never quietly written out of anything that matters again. Not because I stopped trusting my family, but because I finally understood that trust and documentation were never actually in conflict. They were just two different ways of telling the truth. If you were me, sitting in that kitchen and hearing your own father say you work for them, not us, would you have walked out quietly the way I did? Or would you have said something right then? Tell me in the comments. And if this story reminded you that being the reliable one in your family isn't the same as being disposable, share it with someone who needs to hear that today. Hit like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.